I want to talk about today um, one of the articles for this week. And I'll mention one thing before I get into the article. I did post one of our publications to As You Learn. I'd encourage you to read it, and let's look to talk about it a little bit on Friday. This is a real special topic to me. This was actually the context of my dissertation, and at least one half of it. So to be able to discuss it and talk about social media influencers, as well as the law. Now, we talk about FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. However, a lot of what's being talked about is EU and FTC, Federal Trade Commission, for how they're handling some of these new principles within social media influencers. And I want to talk about that today because I think this is one of the areas and futures of advertising. Um, as I've mentioned before, this is kind of the first step in terms of what we would consider zombieism of advertising. And advertisers are very smart into saying that if we can't do things in the traditional sense of being able to put traditional commercials on television, as well as print, as well as outdoor, etc., or radio. This is where we need to reinvent. And I had a student the other day tell me about where do you think the future of advertising is going now that we're getting into subscription services. Um, and my answer kind of said they would do normally what they've always been doing is they invest and adapt based on what's being put in front of them. So if subscription services are coming in, this is where we get into our social media influencers and why they exist and what do they do. And we'll have a later chapter about this, but I like talking about this because there's something very special about what's going on here. And a lot of it is through what we call mass personal communication. So this is your introduction of in, interpersonal communication and mass communication. We've always known mass communication to be a major news source in putting a message out to the masses, whereas interpersonal has been kind of this face-to-face rhetoric between two people. And that's good. But the thing is, we're now in this realm of the illusion of being able to take a group of people perceiving that the message that's being delivered from the influencer or the talking head in general seems like an actual interaction. It seems like there's a relationship being formed, and there's something to be said for that because we've come into such a niche market in terms of advertising that the influencer actually can advertise in such a way that they can talk to the people that are in question and asking questions in the comments section. It's easier because these are niche-based celebrities. So you may have seen these in some of the areas within the readings. And there's a reason why I put law within influencers because it's the newest laws within social media influencers. So y'all have talked about in a few posts about Fyre Fest. So if you haven't seen this documentary, go on Netflix. It's really good in terms of the quintessential cashing to check your rear end or what is it? I don't remember what the phrase is, but they didn't have enough money to do everything they said they would do or the resources. So what you saw was this grandiose scheme of being able to use influencers and painting this paradise for this big concert that would be going on. And what eventually happened was it was a disaster. Nothing got done. Nobody got paid. And everybody was really pissed off about it. And it's a very interesting documentary of how social media influencers work and where the FTC has finally come in and started saying you've got to be careful in terms of the things you've been doing. Now, this has been an interesting scenario because this actually deals a little bit with how we have moved in social media over the years. Because it used to be, especially with, I do a lot of analysis through YouTube, a lot of the valence of the comments that were being delivered through what we've done in content analysis was when a organization, or excuse me, let me back up, a social media influencer were to use an advertisement, they were considered sellouts. So for the longest time, that was what I knew was once the social media influencers started breaking out of their traditional content, because usually how they would start is they're not getting paid at all. They are, a good example is a vlogger by the name of Shay Carl, who started out as a radio DJ in Idaho. And he wasn't getting a lot of traction, but he just kept doing these daily vlogs of just him and his wife, and at the time 3 kids. I think he has 6 now, and just going through this daily routine. And what's interesting about this is we get into what happens when they started getting advertisements. So one of the first ones was an A1 spot. So for steak sauce, he was in LA. He's promoting A1 on a secondary channel. And as you can imagine, for people who are, purists of the channel, they get into what's called expectancy violation theory. And this is a good thing to start looking into is, what do I perceive you as? I actually have these interactions with you that you seem real and you seem genuine, and now all of a sudden you're selling me something. So that doesn't feel real to that person. And so now, granted, this was back in 2009 when this was occurring. So, it's going on 10 years now where some of this started, and some organizations were like, maybe these social media influencers are onto something. So they moved in that direction, but they also realized some of the dangers that came with it. Hence the name, if you've ever seen any videos by Jake and Logan Paul, who produced controversial videos and advertisers had to drop them, and people would sit there and say, we really have to be careful because the behavior is often erratic. So this would get in your traditional celebrities versus your social media influencers, where people would say social media influencers didn't know how to be a celebrity. And so they would often do stupid things that, an agent or a publicist would say, no, don't do anything like that. That's, a terrible idea. But the interesting thing about this is where this is sort of changed. So the Atlantic article that I posted in your readings kind of touches base on this. And I don't want to stick too much on all of these because I want to leave time for each day to cover some of this. The Atlantic article, and I love the subheading, it's saying that these fake sponsor content, it's street cred. The more sponsors you have, the more credibility you have. So this gets into a very specific notion within communication called parasocial interactions and relationships. And one of the key facets in terms of trust through selling, and you'll see a little bit on the paper that I gave y'all, is that credibility plays a big role in this, as well as likability, as well as attraction. So if you have a perceived attraction towards a celebrity, you're more inclined to pay attention to them. If you find this person to be an expert in the specific field that you're looking at, this may be an area where you find them credible, and you find them credible within this particular set. And likability, I mean, what is your content? What is your charisma? What is your demeanor? I talk to streamers very frequently, and one of the things they say is the hardest thing is they have to be on. So when they're on camera, they have to be on in terms of what they're doing. But this goes into, and I go on a long tangent here, but it goes into the reverse of what we've known in terms of sellout culture on YouTube. And that's when we get into Instagram, for instance, of when we're dealing with influencers, we might sit there and say, maybe the area that we want is to make sure that we have sponsors. And where this can be tricky, because if you're an Instagram, and this is kind of what this article looks into, if you are an influencer and you post this information and you aren't necessarily sponsored, you can get in a lot of trouble because you're posting lies, essentially, to say that everything that you're being promoted for, it has to abide by a certain set of rules. And this is where the FTC comes in. So if you've been doing your readings, this goes into what we know about the FTC and how they treat social media influencers. And for the longest time, it used to be this relationship where it seemed like a genuine recommendation. So how I would do this was I would say, I encourage you to buy this product, and I encourage you to buy this product because I believe in it. And if you trust me and you perceive me as credible, then I feel like we have this bond and connection where it's a genuine sell. The issue with that is now we're getting into organizations catching on to that and paying social media influencers to promote their product. Now, this is good for advertisers, but the thing is now the FTC's kind of caught on to where if you pay for that social media influencer, what is occurring now is that if you pay for that social media, they have to explicitly list that it's an advertisement. And if you look on that FTC Q&A, it is specific about where you need to put things. So in other words, you can't have it hidden in a bunch of hashtags to say this is an advertisement. You need to make sure it's up in front and that this is a sponsored post in this case. And so that can hurt a lot of that genuineness that comes in with social media. The other thing that we could consider with this that comes into the law is what can you get around? And it gets into the basic definition for what advertising is. Where does the definition come from? And it's paid. That's one of the biggest facets. It's paid and it's mass communicated. This is where advertising comes in. So what I'm saying is if I get paid to promote this product, then yes, I have to explicitly state through definitions that this is an advertisement. And this is why definitions are so important. And it's also important about where we can work things as advertisers with working with social media influencers, or anybody for that matter, is if we don't pay. So say that we're looking to have a social media influencer and we give them some of our product. So I have a makeup vlogger that I would be working with, and I say, I really want you to try this foundation, this eyeshadow, this mascara from our particular brand and see what you think. This is where we get into the core of what makes persuasion. And that is essentially that you have the freedom of choice. You have a freedom of choice to say no. You have the freedom of choice to say yes. You have the freedom of choice to give it a glaringly amazing review or scathing review. You have that option. We're in book publishing, so I can honestly give my book to a bunch of people and say, honestly, what do you think about it? And they have. We've got our book in the bookstore right now at App State, which is really cool. However, there are people that are explicitly telling us what they think about it, and we can sit there and say, this is not an advertisement. We are not paying them to say good or bad things. So giving the free stuff is actually still within the rules here. And this is where I think you'll see a little bit of the immediate future within advertising, within social media, is, again, if I'm not paying them, I do not have to abide by this FTC law. So something to think about and something to consider, because this is quite a move in terms of what we're used to. I'm going to just record this for today. However, on Thursday, I really do want to get into some of the areas that you can analyze your social media strategy by. It's going to get a little bit off topic, and I want to address the rest of it on Friday. But this will approach what's called a SMART plan. So if you're familiar with this, great. If not, don't worry about it. But I do want you to use it as part of your analysis within your first assignment. So keep that in mind. Like I said, keep reading, keep posting. I'm really enjoying the hell out of them. Just keep me in the loop of what you're doing and what you find interesting, and let's keep talking about it. I will give a quick shout out to cheer on my Bison tonight. However, even if we win, we're going to get swamped by Duke, and I think there's a few people that I know in our class that would be perfectly okay with that. So anyway, y'all have a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. All right.